Ahoy there, and welcome to my deep dive of the 1989 Disney film Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, starring Rick Moranis at the height of his stardom. I'm your host, Kellen. I am back in my mullet wig because when you review 80s and 90s films, this baby gets a lot of mileage. So in this review, we'll be going through the film to see if it still holds up for nostalgic viewers as well as first-time viewers. And I'll give you a spoiler alert, if you haven't seen the movie, it does still hold up. So if you're thinking about watching it, spoiler alert, it's still good. You might as well just go watch it and then come back and watch this review as I'll go through the movie to point out interesting things, funny parts, why it holds up and why it doesn't hold up, that sort of stuff. So if you're ready for some childhood nostalgia, let's get to it. It shouldn't come as a surprise to most that a Disney film holds up for decades because unless they have racist crows in them, they're usually well written and well made. With Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, you have such a unique concept that it can basically carry the whole film itself just with that. So the premise is that the dad, who is a scientist, accidentally shrinks the children and they end up in the backyard, and that's the whole adventure, is the kids trying to get through the backyard. It's a simple premise in a complex environment with some added family drama. So that's the gist. So let's take a deep dive into the film. The title sequence is really cool. It's an animated feature with two little kids running away from larger than life everyday household objects, which is obviously going to be the theme of the movie. The soundtrack is really good. It's kind of this Looney Tunes like brass band, factory line type of music that your brain is just familiar with growing up for sure, which fits really well with the movie because the theme is kind of cartoonish, but it's grounded in reality. I'm not going to play the music for copyright reasons, but I think if you have a look on YouTube or something else for the movie's main theme, you'll definitely get a wave of nostalgia from it. The film's establishing shot is the brother and sister who are clearly polar opposites. The sister is on the phone talking about boys, and the nerdy kid literally sitting at the breakfast table with a lab coat on, tinkering with a little robot. It's a kid's movie. Things aren't subtle. To establish that the dad's an inventor, every gadget has clearly been tinkered with. It's all steampunkish. One of the first examples is this coffee pot that's rigged up to solar panels and it's all automatic. And there's this really strange scene where it kind of turns on and aims at the sun, but it does this weird twitching thing. And it's not the machine doing the twitch. They're literally reversing the film over and over and over again to make it twitch. And it just jarred me instantly. I just thought they clearly like looped it in post rather than having it do that mechanically. And it just looks very strange. And also in this scene, sister, who was Amy in the movie, also in real life, just Amy played by Amy. She's talking about how her mom stayed at her grandma's to establish some relationship issues as well, because it's a kids movie and God forbid kids just have a completely stable home in a movie. And then we cut to the dad who is in the attic already working on a machine, and the kids want him to come down for breakfast, but he's busy. And obviously that's the reason for all the problems going on in, the house and the marriage and the family. And the movie's just like rushing through introducing all the characters to this film because it's immediately over to the neighbors because the neighbor dad, Big Russ, wakes up and he's mad because it's 9 a.m. on a Saturday and he wants to sleep in, and his stupid inventor neighbor is banging away in the attic. So he yells at him and he goes downstairs and he trips over stuff in the yard because his son isn't camping in the yard, setting up traps because that's his sort of character, I guess, the outdoorsy, which is another polar opposite of, the neighbor nerdy kid. And then his other son shows up and he was cut from the football team, so he's not living up to the expectations of his dad. And you're just like potentially overwhelmed by so much family drama and all these characters' interactions that you get in about 2 minutes time. And fair enough, it does it well. You kind of already know how everybody feels about everybody else in that span of time. But if you want kids movie tropes, we've got them. So even with all these gadgets, apparently Amy just is so bad of a cook that she literally burns everything. So I don't know if these gadgets are bad, but I don't know how you burn toast like consistently. You just hit the button, right? This is a bit of our foreshadowing is Nick, aka Nicky, the nerdy science kid, sneaks an oatmeal cookie instead of eating breakfast. That's foreshadowing. It'll come back into play later. But also this might be some of my favorite product placement because he just pulls up this entire box of oatmeal cookies from under the table and places it like camera center, so it's just completely blocking like a third of the screen is just oatmeal cookie, like Little Debbie's oatmeal cookies. There's not even that much blatant product placement in this movie. There's a little bit, and I like to point it out because it's funny to me. Oh, 1 second please. That's refreshing. 0 calories and that much flavor? Now that's a miracle of science. So Rick Moranis' character, who I literally cannot remember the name of because to me he's just Rick Moranis. He's got a science conference today. That's why he's kind of extra rushing around. But we see that his machine doesn't work. It's blowing up apples. So him going to a science conference, it makes you wonder, what is he going to present? A broken thing? Great. But he wants the house cleaned up. He wants the yard mowed because the wife's coming home later and he wants to make a good impression that he's got things back in order. So puts the kids to work. We've got a little bit more foreshadowing because Nicky, Tom Sawyer's his friend, into mowing the yard because he has this remote controlled lawnmower, which is pretty sweet. And it's a Snapper brand lawnmower in case you're in the market. But I feel like as a kid, I would totally want to mow yards if I had like a remote control. I don't know why we don't have that now in the first place. Like there's like robotic ones that just do like a Roomba, but for your yard. But I don't know if there's any that you just control with the remote control. This sounds awesome. I was sitting on a gold mine here, people. So we kind of cut to the neighbor family who are planning a fishing trip. So the parents are kind of preoccupied. The kids are kind of doing their own thing. So Ron, who is the younger son of the neighbors, trying to play baseball with everybody in his family. His dad's too busy. Little Russ is too busy. So this is maybe one of my favorite lines in any movie ever. He goes to the nerdy kid and says, "Hey, do you want to play baseball?" And the nerdy kid replies, "Baseball is for mortals," which is this like totally metal thing to say. And I tried to like Google if that was a thing people said. I have like this vague recollection that maybe mortals be synonymous with like an idiot or something like that, but I couldn't find that in any sort of slang where people were regularly calling each other mortal. It's just this like sick thing to say. I'm gonna try to incorporate that into my everyday speech anytime I don't want to do anything. And there's this great non-scene that I didn't really notice the first time I watched, but the second time I picked up on. The neighbors are packing the RV and the mom's got all these, she's like fully loaded carrying thing, and the dad is whining about his kids. He like hands her another bag and he just grabs a lantern and they walk to the RV and she's just like carrying like 20 things and he's just got this lantern while he thinks about things in life. And it's such a subtle joke that it's just perfect. It's one of my favorite jokes of the whole movie and I didn't even notice it the first time. So in classic kid movie storytelling, Ron he's just out playing baseball by himself in his backyard, like swinging at a baseball. Bro, what do you think is going to happen if you hit that baseball? Your yard is like 20 square feet. You're right next to the fence in the first place, and he's aiming right at his neighbor's house. Where could that ball go that you want it to go? So he hits the ball and it goes through the attic window of his neighbor's. It hits the machine, it bounces around, it turns it on, it lands in the wires, and so the machine's gone haywire and it's actually shrinking things now because the laser's hitting the baseball and it's making it work now. And I actually really like this scene because his older brother just grabs him and is like, "You're going next door to tell them what happened." Thank you, movie, because when is that ever the case? Instead, half the movie is people trying to get away with something like this. But this movie is just like sibling responsibility. Take ownership of your follies. Good job. And then when they get to the door, it's just Amy and Nicky. And it's like they've never met. He's like stammering and saying, oh, I live next door. And it's like, you guys not know each other? You go to the same school, you're neighbors, you would know each other. Surely. It's very strange. Is it just me? Because I was definitely friends with everybody that lived in my neighborhood, and I'm not social at all. But if people are breaking windows and setting things on fire, I'm there. That's what you do with your neighborhood friends, right? Or is that just me? And I want to point out that Russ has an earring hole in his left ear, but no earring. So I'm thinking somebody definitely told this kid on the set that he can't have his earring in. Conspiracy theories? Come on, Disney, pick a side. So we cut to Rick Moranis and he's giving his presentation in front of this room full of scientists, I guess. It's not really clear who these people are or what he wants, I guess, funding. But people are just walking out of his presentation, which is kind of rude because I don't know what they wanted from him. He's explaining what his project is. And I guess, the issue is, it's all theory, but if you can't prove it or do it, then what's the point? Which is fair, but at the same point, why is there's a whole room full of people here just to, rag on him, I guess. Like, Rick, you've got a laser that blows things up. You know who would buy that? The United States military. You're set for life now. Who do you think funds all of science? It's the military. back to the kids looking for the baseball in the attic, and the machine's gone haywire, so it zaps the two young ones, and then Amy and Russ go to look for them, and they get zapped. Everybody's zapped. The kids have been shrunk. The movie officially begins their adventure. Fortunately, they did not get exploded by the laser, which could have happened, right? It just now got fixed inadvertently. So fortunately, this movie is not a 10-minute movie long where kids get exploded by their crazy father, and then it turns into some murder drama. So this is our first look at the kids shrunken, and this movie does a kind of a mix of special effects between blue screen stuff and then mostly like oversized sets, which is like really cool. And I think that's why a lot of the special effects hold up in this film, because it's not overused and they mostly use oversized objects, so it looks real because it basically is real, right? That's practical effects for you. There is some iffiness throughout the movie that I'll probably point out because why not? But for the most part, the special effects do not distract from the movie. You're not like pointing at him going, go look how bad that looks. 90% of it looks great, really. So Rick Moranis comes home and he's looking for the kids. He looks up in the attic and the machine just happened to turn itself off. It like jangled the baseball out of it, which then hit the off button. So everything looks normal upstairs. But it also shrank his chair and a couch. So when he comes in, he's walking around and he goes to sit in his chair and he just falls backwards and he's like, where's my chair? And the kids are like on the ground like yelling for him. Hoo boy, it's a good thing he didn't step on his kids right away, because that would have been a disaster. And he also notices the window's broken and he's just like, oh, of all the things, it's just like, how do you think the window is broken? Like maybe something happened. The window's broken. Things in the attic are missing. Would surely warrant some critical thought. But instead, he just goes completely Citizen Kane on his machine and just starts bashing it because he's so frustrated by everything. It's just raining down pieces on these kids. And then he calms down, he sweeps up the stuff he bashed off of it, which also happens to sweep up his children, and he throws them in the trash, and he takes the trash out to all the way to the back of the garden, and he dumps it with the kids. So the kids kind of have this tantrum about what they're going to do next. The neighbor kids are like, oh, I'm going home. It's just like, okay, you're like an inch tall. What does going home solve for you? And like Russ is like, be honest, can your dad fix us? And it's like, well, he shrank us, so probably. And if not, who else could possibly? What other options do these kids have besides trying to get the dad to fix? It's his ray gun, right? He built it, so nobody else built it. See if that works. And where they're standing, Ron's like, let's go. And so he slides down this big blade of grass. And Amy's like, we need to stick together. And it's like, well, what are you going to do? Just stay on this garbage bag and not move anywhere? Like, who wouldn't want to slide down that grass? It looked awesome. I would slide down that grass. Sounds like the best part of being tiny. And my initial thought is that, just go back to the house, right? Like that's what three of them are thinking. But Amy is actually the smart one. And this is actual safety advice. If you're lost somewhere, is to just stay where people know you are. So if they did stay at that garbage bag, their dad would have found them, because once he realizes that he shrunk them and that he swept them up, he's going to go to the garbage bag. And he does. Spoiler alert. Just jump ahead a little bit. But he does. So that would have solved it. And that's why you stay by your car if it breaks down somewhere, or you stay at your tent if you get snowed in or something like that. People know where you are. They can go to find you. If you just wander off, then you could be anywhere. That's survival, folks. Amy had it right, but everybody bullied her into going into the wilderness that is their backyard. Why doesn't anybody listen to women in these movies? One thing that doesn't hold up in this movie is Amy will not shut up about going to the mall. She must bring up going to the mall like 10 times in this movie. I hope we can get back to the house so I can have time to go to the mall. Like, kids can't relate to that nowadays, right? Do kids go to the mall anymore? I don't think so. There's nothing there. It's like, Amy, we are in serious peril right now. The mall is not something you should be too concerned about. You should probably be concerned about not being murdered by almost everything in the world now that you are the lowest on the food chain. But we all deal with trauma differently, and Amy's got that mall in her mind, and she's going to get there. I'm not sure if the mom pulling up in her Volkswagen is product placement because it's possibly the least flash car in history, but there's about 10 seconds of her slowly pulling in front of the house and getting out. So I don't know if this is like, oh yeah, check out this new Volkswagen Golf, I think, something. And she's apparently a realtor and she sold a house, and Rick Moranis is like, I blew it at the conference and nobody likes my invention. I'm going to give up and just get my old job back and give up on all my dreams and focus on my family instead. Hooray. And the kids are just kind of wandering around and they're like, let's whistle for the dog. And Russ can't whistle. And Amy's like, just put your lips together and blow. And he's like, and it's just this sort of like, the script is so subtle. It's nothing super heavy handed. There's not like a million zingers in it. It's somewhat normal for such a crazy series of events. Like the whole mom and dad thing, it's so basic and it doesn't focus on them that much, so it doesn't like bog down the movie with like boring normal family drama, but it's always just kind of there, and then it goes back to the kids just to slow down the movie a little bit, I think. And then one thing with the special effects that stuck out to me is that sometimes it'll cut out a part of the screen and it kind of outlines it in black, and that's where like there's the sets, and then they like digitize the kids walking through another part of the set, so it looks like they're walking in the distance, kind of blue screen. It looks a little weird because you're kind of like, what's this like heavy black line? But you probably don't notice it unless you're trying to notice it. It just reminds me of cartoons when you'd have like a door in a wall that you knew the wall was something was going to happen with the wall because it was, that line was thicker than the rest of the cell. Just a fun tidbit. So the kids are climbing a flower to get higher to try to whistle at the dog, and everything's hairy. Like the plants, like the flower stem is hairy, and all the grass has this sort of spiderwebby sort of quality to it, which made me Google flowers and stuff. And they have like little tiny hairs all over them, which is unsettling but accurate. So good job, movie. I don't like it though. These kids are just totally fearless. They're just instantly up this flower stem, which is like putting them 30 feet in the air. And it's just like waving back and forth. And Nikki goes flying off of one into like a flower. And I thought it was cool. This part's cool because he's like, you're allergic to pollen. He's like, I'm too small. I can't breathe it in. He's just covered in it, which is just a cool thing, right? It's just cool. There's just so many smart decisions about them being small. Like, I know that's the whole movie, but it's just done well, so I enjoy it. And then this swarm of bees show up, which I've never seen a swarm of bees just show up in a backyard like this anyway, but which would be scary enough if you were just a normal person and 100 bees showed up, but let alone like being a little tiny kid. And this is like maybe the iffiest part of some of the special effects because the bees they look like they're like black and white flying over them. And I don't know why that is. It's real weird. And then the bee grabs one of them, and then Russ also jumps onto the bee to try to save the day. And then this bee just flies them through the yard, which is a miracle they don't get flown off because it looks like they're going very fast. So another catastrophe averted because none of these children got flung off this high-speed bee. Ends up who knows where, just some tiny corpse in the backyard. Like there's a lot of times that things could have gone very bad for these children. And then Rick Moranis is back in the backyard. And Big Russ kind of comments on his grass being out of control, which it's not. You see the yard like a lot, and it's not that bad for the most part. I don't know how short grass needs to be because mine's like 1,000 times longer because I don't care. But apparently these people do care so much that it's like 2 inches of grass and he's getting grilled about it. And then Rick Moranis is like, yo, it's healthy for the ecosystem, you know? Gotta keep bugs and everything happy. But then a bee shows up and he grabs a baseball bat and starts swinging at it. Like, chill out, Rick. It's a honeybee. Save the bees, bro. So once Rick has the baseball bat, he's like, baseball bat? My lame, nerdy son thinks baseball's for mortals. He wouldn't have a baseball bat. So he looks up at the window, he puts 2 and 2 together, and he goes, it was a baseball. And so he goes up into the attic, and he sees the baseball this time, and then he steps on his tiny chair, and then he puts it all together, right? A baseball must have caused the machine to shrink everything, And maybe they shrunk the kids. Oh no. Too bad I smashed my machine up now that it works. Uh-oh. So like I said earlier, after that, he goes to the trash bag and sees that it's tore open now. So he's like, oh, the kids are in the yard now. So he doesn't want to walk through the yard. So he shimmies along the fence and looks like a crazy person. And then this leads to more and more shenanigans as he comes up with contraptions to search for the backyard. And when he's in one of these contraptions, he accidentally turns on the sprinklers, which leads to this World War II bombardment scene of water just smashing the ground all around them as they try to run for cover, which is like crazy intense, really, for just a kids movie. It looks like Saving Private Ryan or something. Like the sound effects for the water hits, like just sounds so intense. It's just really good. It's just such a cool thing. And it's just like exploding soapy water and smoke as well for the explosions, which is neat. They almost make it to cover, but Amy gets blasted and knocked unconscious, and she falls into this huge puddle, and Russ jumps in after him because he's a noble hero and gives her mouth-to-mouth CPR and saves the day. And this movie tends to jump back and forth between the kids and the parents. And I think that's just basically to like slow down the pacing. Even though I thought this cut was kind of weird because you kind of had like that exciting scene and then it just kind of cuts away to the neighbors. And there's this weird Easter egg that I noticed when I was watching where their friends pull up in an RV because they're having a little bit of a caravan with their buddies to go fishing. And you can see behind the RV that there's this big wall that goes from like the house to across the street, and it's the set. And I don't know why they either shot that angle, because you can see the wall. It looks really, I was like, what's behind the RV there? And you can tell that there's not enough space where that's something other than, I mean, this isn't like Attack on Titan or anything. There's no protective wall around this little suburb, and it's like connected to a house. I was just like, so I thought, well, back then movies were mostly 4:3 prop, but you would still have widescreen in the theaters, I would think. So I'm not sure if this was always just some Easter egg or if this was once actually releasing the widescreen, it was just they didn't care about what was on the edges because people were watching in 4:3 before widescreen was popular. But Big Russ is like, oh, I can't go to the fishing trip because actually there's a bit of strange family stuff with the neighbors. Like Russ it's kind of like that angry dumb dad and then caring mother stereotype. But then he's like, he doesn't want to admit that his kids are missing or he can't find them, as if that would make him seem an irresponsible dad to his friend. So he's just like, oh, the wife's plumbing. I can't go on the trip because of her. And it's just like, bro, come on, grow up. And there's a lot of that sort of thing where like the wife is right about something and then he'll just shrug it off and act like he was right about it. I don't know. It's just a weird trope. Like both the wives are kind of the lowest characters importance wise. They're just sort of your typical caring mom. Like Rick Moranis' wife kind of just calls the police and searches the mall and calls around all the families, and that's kind of her whole character, not really doing that much fun stuff. And we come back to the kids, and Amy's giving big eyes at Russ for his heroic deeds. And then Nikki's like, where'd you learn how to do mouth-to-mouth resuscitation? And he's like, French class, kid. And I don't know if that still holds up. I don't know if kids still talk about French kissing all the time on the playground. Ask your child if you have one. Do they know what French kissing is? And tell them I sent you. I'm not sure if the next scene is the most iconic or if it's just me. They're basically talking about how hungry they are, and then lo and behold, they run into a giant oatmeal cookie. Little Debbie's is back, baby. And I can't stop thinking about how great this would be. That would definitely be the best part of being shrunk, is just being able to have like this mountain of food that is basically like nothing, right? It's just a cookie. But now that you're tiny, it's like the world's biggest cookie and it's just right there for you. So they're just like grabbing these handfuls of like cookie and icing and smash them together. It's just, yes, this is all I've ever wanted in life, right? I mean, as an adult, I could put that together. I could make a gigantic cookie if I were so inclined and eat it like a tiny cookie eating monster. But I think like if you, as a kid, that's got to be an awesome thought. Like you think about all the stuff you would want to eat if you were tiny. Like why didn't Rick Moranis just talk about that at the science conference? Be like, look, scientist, I will shrink you to the size of a penny, and then you can go and eat the biggest mountain of cinnamon bun you've ever seen in your lives. Like, who doesn't sign on to that? Like, oh, okay, yeah, definitely. Here's all the money I could possibly give you. Please give me the world's largest cinnamon bun. But then I was thinking, realistically, if you did get shrunk down like that, there'd be like a point where whatever you're eating it wouldn't be the same, because like the consistency would be different. Because if you got shrunk so small that you like grabbed some cream from that cookie, it might just be like really hardened crystallized sugar that you're just like can't really eat. Or you might grab a big chunk of flour, because at some point that stuff, the ingredients become separate from when they're this big to this big. It's kind of like when they make, Guinness Book of World Records largest whatever food item, but then it's actually like not good to eat because the ingredients are so either separated or bland or whatever. So it looks cool, but it's actually like trash food. So potentially being shrunk down would just make the food you're trying to eat like way worse. But that's no fun. Like, Sorry to ruin the fantasy with potential logic. I'm not happy about it either. And plus, if you're making food, say, larger than it was, and destroying the law of conservation of mass, and going against everything natural, creating a black hole, who knows? But yeah. The important thing is whether or not a giant cookie or cake is delicious to eat. I want answers. Anyway, back to the movie. While they're eating this gigantic cookie and living the dream, an ant shows up, and the ant's mostly a model with stop motion and a little bit of blue screen stuff going on, and it looks really good. It's constantly making this weird squeaking noise, which maybe ants make weird squeaking noises, I don't know, but it's just kind of strange. And initially they're kind of like, get out of here, ant, this is our gigantic cookie. Like, but you can share, right? It's a gigantic cookie, you couldn't possibly eat it. Let the ant have some, you jerk. Also, there's probably a ton of bacteria on that oatmeal cookie, so these kids are probably going to die from the gigantic bacteria that is growing on this discarded food item in the yard. But that's a problem for another day. Anyway, back to the ant. They decide that they should ride the ants, because I guess ants could be fast at that speed. I suppose so. Riding something is better than not riding it. It's better than walking, right? So let's wrangle this ant. And Nikki does point out that ants are 50 times stronger than their body weight. It's not like they're underestimating this ant that could totally rip them apart with ease. They keep jumping on it, trying like a bucking bronco, trying to ride it. They're just getting like flung clear across the grass, and it's just, I don't know how these kids are not like brutally broken throughout this film. But Amy figures out to use a sort of a carrot and a stick with the cake to lure it, and then they rig up a harness and a stick just instantly. They just rig up a harness to ride this stupid thing. And this ant, instead of just ignoring this tiny chunk of food that Amy has, he just ignores the cookie and slaves himself to these children. There's this odd scene because they've kind of established the dog knows the kids are in the backyard, and Rick Moranis is on this weird contraption looking for the kids by like hovering over it. And so the dog, I thought, was going to maybe lead Rick towards where the kids are, like sniff them out or hear them or something like that. But he just starts pulling Rick Moranis around his contraption, which winds him up and then just spins him wildly. And it's just this totally unnecessary shenaniganery. And I just kind of thought, what's this dog doing? He could have crushed the kid about 1,000 times because he's just running circles around the yard anyway. It just confused me. I thought it was going a whole different way, and it was just nonsense for nonsense's sake. So the mom pulls back in, and she pulls in behind a cop car. And so she goes inside and calls the cops. They're there. Who are you calling them for? They're outside. They're not outside. They're at your neighbors, who you also know kids are missing. So they called the cops, right? Just go next door and be like, our kids are also missing. They might all be together. Who knows? Like, just get the entire police force over here for 2 houses. Just work together. They're not unfriendly with each other. The moms certainly aren't. They're nice to each other. And the dads maybe think the other ones are weird, but they're not enemies. Just thought it was odd. And I'm guessing this is the time before Amber Alerts, because the police are basically like, your kids will show up, don't worry about it, they're probably just out with their friends. Bro, I'm telling you, my kids are missing. They know we were going camping. They wouldn't just run off right now and screw up the weekend. So next door, Rick Moranis tells his wife that everything that happened, the kids are shrunk, they're in the backyard, but then the super cops show up and they're like, hey, are your kids missing? And Rick's like, nope, they're in the backyard. And his wife faints, and the cops are just like, okay. No, a lady called the police, some guy told you that the kids aren't missing, and then she passes out and the cops are just like, see you later. A job well done. Case closed. This isn't doing much for kids' faith in the police. So it's getting dark, and Amy realizes she's not going to make it to the mall. So Brad's probably going to ask that skank Amanda to the dance. And then they decide to let the aunt go back home, which I guess ants can do that. And it's just one of those scenes where it's like, go on, get out of here. Go back to your family, aunt. But it doesn't want to because it loves them. And now both the parents are in harnesses with headlamps searching for the kids. And Big Russ kind of walks over and is like, these crazy neighbors of mine. And he's like outside smoking, and he just flicks his cigarette into their yard while they're right there. It's just like, whoa, dude. Like, passive aggressive much. Hey, do you mind not throwing burning things into my yard? It cuts to the kids with like this meteor, this badly animated meteor of a cigarette slamming into the ground and just exploding, and it like rains down burning ash, and just like this huge chunk hits Russ. That would seriously hurt. They're tiny. It's burning ash. That would have like scorched him. And so they all run over to this burning cigarette, and Nikki's like a foot away from it, just coughing. He's like, it's like, dude, you're just straight up inhaling just nothing but harsh toxins into your face. Back up, bro. Like, what are you doing? If you thought a giant cookie was great, wait till you get a giant cigarette too. Oh boy, that'll last you for years. But this is the moment where Russ is like, oh, Dad never smokes unless he's really worried. Oh, he must care about us. Like, yeah, you're his children. He's not that awful to you. And then the mom, I also can't remember her name. She's like, we need to tell the neighbors about the kids and what happened to them. And she just pulls the ripcord that's holding them both onto the contraption, and they just fall flat onto the grass. It's like, lady, you know the children are in the backyard, and you just put two full-body adults flat onto the ground. Like, this was probably the most dangerous part of this entire movie for not wanting to crush the kids accidentally. Like, what are you doing? It was so strange. Like, why do you think you were in this contraption in the first place, you idiot? They tell the neighbors about the shrinking ray and what happened to the kids, and Big Russ is like, if anything happened to those kids, I've got an air hammer in my attic and I'll blast you to smithereens. And then he storms off. It's like, oh, Jesus Christ. He's gonna straight up murder Rick Moranis with an air hammer. It's like gruesome. Like, I get that it's like a cartoonish threat, but it's absolutely brutal. It's a very dark threat to make. And meanwhile, the kids are trying to find a place to sleep, and they find a giant Lego brick, thank product placement, and they crawl into it. It's surely this plastic cylinder is not more comfortable than just soft ground, but I guess they had to get some funding somehow. And then even on the ground, Russ is laying against a big rock. Like, what's wrong with you people? Get comfortable. So the parents are having a heart-to-heart, and they're like, we've got to get the family back together. That's the most important thing. It's like, well, okay, sure, but also you need to have careers to fund your family. I mean, that's always the thing about these movies is, oh, the parents work too much. Oh, the kids are unhappy because the parents are working. It's like, yo, look at your house. You think this house is free? You think the food you eat is free? You think all these cool gadgets I make are free? And I would say that this movie is not terrible about too much family drama. It's like these little bits just to slow down what's going on with the adventure. It's there, but it doesn't really drag the movie down, which is good. I guess it just adds a little bit more to the feel good. All of the families getting back together, both with the children finding their way home and then parents finding their way together. How great. How heartwarming. And Rick Moranis is like, don't worry about the kids. They're with the Thompson children. And the mom's like, oh, Amy and little Russ Thompson. That's what I'm worried about. Like, for one, they apparently barely know each other. And it's like, do you think your daughter's just so boy crazy that you don't trust her in the dark with any boy ever? Is she a total floozy or something? But concerns were warranted. And there's a weird line. Russ is like, I always thought you were too popular to notice me. And Amy was like, I was too popular, but I was stupid to never notice a nice guy like you. And then they make out. So good shout, mom. But during the makeout session, the craziest scene happens, and a scorpion comes out of nowhere, starts attacking them. This might have been the most confused I was through this movie because I was thinking like, where did this scorpion come from? And it doesn't say where they are in the United States, but the scorpions are like 100% in the Southwest, you know, the deserts and whatnot. And there was no foreshadowing to say like a pet scorpion getting loose, like in Home Alone with the tarantula. So when the scorpion shows up, I was just like, what? Where did he come from? You guys have scorpions in your backyards? I would never go in my backyard if there was a potential scorpion back there. And this part is like straight up terrifying because Ron gets stuck in this Lego block and this scorpion's just like going at him with his claws, and it's just like completely vicious. And it's just like, good lord, these kids are going to get murdered by this scorpion. The scorpion looks like monstrous. There's like all these close-ups of it, like with its claws and his mouth and his tail, and the auntie comes to Ron's rescue and it gets into a fight with the scorpion, and scorpion stabs it with its stinger, and then all the kids come and start throwing rocks and sticks at it, and it's just like clawing at him, and it's just, there's no way these kids would have survived this. It was just an absolute nightmare of a fight scene. But fortunately, they like spear its eye and it runs off, and unfortunately Auntie took a fatal blow. So we get a sad death scene with Auntie, which I rate a 3 out of 10 on the RTAC scale because it's just an ant and we've really only known it for a very short time, so it wasn't too emotionally devastating for me. But I guess you had to have a death in this film. At least it wasn't one of the kids. Good lord, these kids are lucky to be alive at this point. So now it's morning, and you would think we'd be wrapping up the movie, but there's still another terrifying thing to happen. So the cool kid with the skateboard shows up because he wants to mow the yard, which, you know, that's a good friend. Like, I know he wants to play with the RC car and stuff, but I mean, to show up the next day and do it, that's pretty cool. So he starts mowing the yard, and it's creating the sort of tornado effect, and the kids are kind of running for cover again. Like, everything's getting swept up into the blades, which is, I guess, what happened. I don't know how lawnmowers work besides spinning blades. I don't know how much effect they have on the air. So they think they're safe in like a mole hole. And this is the exact same time the parents kind of tell this kid to stop. So the lawnmower stops over where they're hiding. So they're all kind of getting pulled up into it. And right before they can get Willy Wonka into the blades, he actually does shut it off. So that momentum just flings them through the air and they just come crashing down. And it's not even like they like landed in anything soft. They're just like pelted against the ground. But I guess they're fine. They look like a mess when it cuts back to them. But then, like, the parents just grab this kid and they're like shouting in his face, "When did you talk to Nikki?" He's like, "Yesterday." And they're like, "Get out of here." "Oh, excuse me. You can't touch me like that. I'm not your child." And they're like, "All right, see ya. Sorry." So finally the dog shows up, and because the dog does know that they're there. Like, I know he almost killed them earlier, but the dog is aware that they're there, and he kind of carries them into the house. And he jumps on the table to bark at the dad, but Nikki goes flying into the cereal. And this is the iconic scene because it's also like the movie cover as well, is this kid in this cereal with his dad eating it while he's in there. Which again, this is another really good set piece with these giant Cheerios. Even though I didn't see a Cheerios box for product placement, so these could just be generic wheat circles. But like, imagine after all of this, the dad accidentally eats one of the children. I know that's not what the movie really wants you to think about, but God, think about how horrific that would be. Like, oh, there's the kids. Oh, where's Nikki? Oh, you ate him when you're eating your cereal. How traumatic would that be? That's not funny. That shouldn't be funny, but it is funny. And also, I kind of wonder how maybe this is when people started thinking about like the vor fetish, where people like fantasize about being eaten. Nikki was living the dream here. He almost got eaten. I hope that didn't awaken anything in him. But his dad notices Nikki's on the spoon, thanks to, again, the dog bites his ankle to kind of snap him to pay attention. So like, the dog's the savior, I guess, but like, where were you earlier, dog? Why are you waiting this long? So they're all upstairs in the attic, and he's trying to fix the machine so it won't keep blowing things up. And the kids put on this charade of, you know, baseball. And it's kind of like goes on for way too long. Like, you can figure out that they're pretending to play baseball. Like, it takes forever until Russ is like, "Baseball," and they're like, "Hey, you helped out there, neighbor dad. And then Rick is just like, oh, that's what it is. The laser was too strong. The baseball softened the laser. Oh, that makes sense now. And instead of testing another apple, they're just like, let's get to it. Let's unshrink these kids. And so the dads are both like, and so then Rick Moranis is like, test it on me first. It's like, no, test it on anything else first that won't die if this is not the solution just because it worked once. But then Big Russ is like, those are my kids. You're gonna test it on me. And so he goes and sits and they shrink him. And when they shrink him, he's like hanging on the edge of this stool. Like, it's comical because he looks a bit goofy while he's clinging to the edge, but they're all just staring at him, dangling. Like, if he falls, he's gonna plummet like 300 feet relative to him. Like, somebody help him out. So, but he just climbs his way back up there and he's like, oh yeah, cool. It's just like, whoa. Let's just all watch him almost plunge to his tiny death. And then they unshrink him, and it's less of a subtle joke than the one earlier, but he tries to put his hat on and it's way too big for him, which is worrying, right? It's a funny gag, but also this machine is clearly not as fine-tuned as it should be, perhaps, for blowing people up and shrinking them down right now. So they unshrink the kids, and the first thing Amy asks is like, are you and dad okay? Amy, what? I know that's important to you, but good lord. It's almost like she's kind of just not even paying attention to everything in the movie. She's got the mall, she's got her mom and dad, and that's it. She doesn't care about anything else this entire movie. He just went through the most insane adventure in history, and you're almost blanked out everything except what happened at breakfast the day before. She's like still on that topic. Like, oh, are you guys okay? Like, yeah, we're fine. Are you okay? Like, what happened? But everybody is happy now, and they're all accepting of each other, and Russ is like, I'll try out for football, and Big Russ is like, no, you do whatever is important to you. Everybody's happy. We're all happy now. You know, you go through a traumatic experience like this and we just put everything behind us and appreciate our family for what it is. That's an important lesson. Hopefully they stick with it and don't have to constantly be having traumatic experiences to appreciate each other. And now, like, the families are buddy, and there's no reason for the Thompsons to be friendly with this neighbor. Like, you put my family through absolute peril. We almost lost our children forever to either death or just basically being MIA forever. Or not MIA, they're not military, but just missing, right? Like, those kids could have got picked up by the trash and just like, I know you didn't mean ill will, but your recklessness and your negligence is unforgivable. I would not feel safe to have my family over at your house with your crazy experimental technology. But instead of that, they just shake hands and now they're BFFs. The last scene is them eating a gigantic turkey. And then for some reason, the movie decides to end on the worst possible note with this fake fade out. And then Nikki being like, oh, French class, I get it. Ha 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 ha. While he stares at the camera. It's like, why did you end on that note? It's so stupid. Like, it's a kid's movie, but like, that's your finishing joke? Why? So that's the movie. And like I said earlier, I think this movie really holds up even today. I enjoyed watching it, and I was like, actively looking for things that would make it dated and not hold up. And for the most part, I think the special effects, because a lot of it is, you know, big set pieces, practical effects with models, and then the blue screen is kind of the iffy parts, but it's used pretty sparingly, so you don't notice it that much. And some of the stop motion with like the scorpion and the ant looks a little weird, but it's one of those things where obviously it's a movie, so it's not so bad that you're like making fun of it or just thinking it looks terrible. It looks pretty good. It's about an 8 out of 10 on holding up on the special effects. So it's nothing that really takes you out of, you know, the adventure. And I think the writing is good and realistic. There's not a lot of obvious jokes that get set up. There's not zingers. A lot of the jokes are like kind of subtle and just kind of like humorous, but nothing like hilarious, because really the general adventure is the most important part of the movie. Just the concept of it and what they can do with that set. And I think they do it really well. And everything pretty much holds up. Obviously, the clothing and some of the lingo is dated, and Amy wanting to go to the mall constantly is dated. But I would still think kids would enjoy this movie just as much today as they did in the 90s. So it's still a good family movie to watch. I know there was a sequel a few years after it called Honey, I Blew Up the Kids, and I had to have watched it, and I just can't think of what happens in it. I have this guess, and I don't know if I'm misremembering something that happened, but I think like maybe a baby gets made larger similar, but I'm not sure that would make for a good movie because I can't think of why that would be interesting. And I don't think the kids just get blown up to larger sizes because if they were just kind of bigger, like they would just, I don't know, be playing basketball, which isn't that interesting. But if they were made so large that they were, I don't know, like Godzilla size, I feel like I would remember that as a movie. So for the life of me, I cannot remember what happens in that sequel. So it makes me kind of want to watch it just to see what it's about. And they are actually rebooting this franchise with Rick Moranis in a movie called Shrunk, which should come out in the next year or so. But like I said, this movie holds up, so I don't know why they're rebooting it, but you know how that goes. Thank you for watching my deep dive of Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. If you've made it this far, then I truly appreciate you. I would extra appreciate if you could hit that like button. And if you haven't subscribed, go ahead and subscribe for more movie reviews when I get them done. So until next time, take care.